The chamber of the Galactic Council had never known silence quite like this. Thousands of species, each representing civilizations older than humanity's recorded history, sat in suspended tension as the final human delegate finished speaking. His words had been simple, almost unremarkable in tone. But the effect had been immediate, like a shockwave rippling through a fragile system that had never been tested this way before. Humanity had only recently joined the interstellar stage, a young species by every measurable standard. Their technology was crude compared to the ancient empires that spanned entire clusters. Their fleets were small. Their history, chaotic and violent. Yet somehow, they had become loud. Not in voice, but in presence. In influence. In the way their ideas spread like wildfire across borders that had remained untouched for millennia. At first, the Council had dismissed them. Every cycle brought new species into the fold, most adapted, assimilated, and faded into the predictable order of things. Humanity, however, refused to fit. They questioned treaties. They debated ancient laws. They laughed at traditions that had gone unquestioned for tens of thousands of years. It was not aggression that made them dangerous. It was curiosity. So the Council decided to act. The official decree was wrapped in careful language, temporary communication restrictions for cultural stabilization. In practice, it meant one thing: silence humanity. Their networks were cut from the interstellar grid. Their ambassadors recalled. Their access to shared knowledge revoked. A species isolated, contained, muted. They expected resistance. What they did not expect was nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. Human systems remained quiet. No protests, no retaliation, no desperate attempts to reconnect. The Council grew confident. Perhaps the species had understood its place after all. Perhaps silence had worked. Then the signals began. At first, they were faint, background noise detected at the edges of monitored space. Unregistered transmissions bouncing between relay stations, slipping through gaps the Council hadn't noticed in centuries. They weren't military signals. They weren't even encrypted in any sophisticated way. They were stories, human stories and narratives, music, fragments of history, ideas, broadcast not through official channels, but through countless improvised methods. Old satellites repurposed. Civilian freighters acting as relays. Even analog transmissions riding on frequencies most species had long abandoned. It was messy, inefficient, impossible to fully track, and completely unstoppable. Within a single cycle, human content began appearing across Council space. Not as a flood, but as a steady, persistent trickle that found its way into unexpected places. A mining colony on the edge of known space picked up a human lullaby. A trade station received a philosophical debate about freedom and control. A military outpost intercepted a story about a small, defiant species that refused to stay quiet. The reaction was unexpected. Some species ignored it. Others found it strange, even unsettling. But a few, just a few at first, found themselves listening. Really listening. There was something raw in human expression. Something unrefined but deeply compelling. They spoke not as ancient empires, but as beings still struggling, still growing, still asking questions no one else dared to ask anymore. The Council tried to contain it. They tightened surveillance, shut down suspected relay points, and issued strict penalties for any system caught distributing unauthorized human transmissions. But every shutdown revealed two more sources. Every restriction forced humans to adapt in ways the Council couldn't predict. They weren't following a centralized plan. They were improvising. That was the problem. You couldn't silence a species that didn't rely on a single voice. Soon, something even more troubling began to happen. Non-human systems started rebroadcasting human content. At first, it was dismissed as contamination, rogue operators, or fringe groups. But the pattern grew. Entire stations began hosting human discussions. trade networks integrated human problem-solving techniques. Even some council members privately accessed the transmissions, though they would never admit it. Humanity, it seemed, had not been silenced. It had been amplified. Back on Earth, the mood was far from defeated. The Council's attempt to isolate them had sparked something deep within the human psyche, a familiar reaction, one forged through centuries of struggle. When pushed, humans didn't shrink. They adapted. They innovated. And when necessary, they became louder in ways no one expected. Their scientists turned obsolete technologies into communication tools. Their artists became messengers. Their civilians became carriers of ideas. There was no single leader orchestrating it all. Just a shared understanding: if they were going to be cut off, they would simply find new ways to connect. The Council convened again, urgency replacing their usual composure. Reports flooded in, systems influenced, populations questioning long-standing doctrines, younger species adopting human frameworks of thought. It wasn't rebellion. Not yet. But it was change, and change was something the Council feared more than war. One elder species finally voiced what many were beginning to realize. We did not silence them, it said slowly. We provoked them. The chamber fell into uneasy agreement, because humanity's strength had never been in their fleets or their technology. It had always been in their ideas, their relentless drive to question, to explore, to challenge what others accepted as unchangeable truth. By trying to suppress that, the Council had done the one thing guaranteed to make it spread further. Humanity hadn't broken the system, they had exposed its weaknesses, and now, across the galaxy, those weaknesses were being seen for the first time. In the quiet corners of distant systems, species began asking dangerous questions. Why had the Council needed to silence a single voice? What were they afraid of? And if humanity's ideas were truly so disruptive, what did that say about the system itself? The answers didn't come immediately, but the questions kept spreading, and unlike transmissions, questions couldn't be intercepted. By the time the Council realized the full extent of what they had unleashed, it was already too late. Humanity was no longer just a species within the galaxy. It had become something else, a catalyst, a spark, a reminder that even the oldest systems could be challenged. They had tried to silence humanity. Instead, they had given it a reason to be heard. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible against the vast backdrop of galactic civilization. A policy questioned here, a tradition reconsidered there. No riots, no open defiance, just quiet reconsideration. The kind that spread slowly, like cracks forming beneath a surface that once seemed unbreakable. In academic circles across multiple systems, scholars began dissecting human transmissions with unusual interest. Their philosophies were chaotic, contradictory at times, yet undeniably alive. Where older species prized stability and consistency, humans embraced conflict in ideas, using it as a tool for growth rather than something to suppress. Trade hubs became unlikely centers of transformation. Merchants, once focused purely on profit, started adopting human negotiation tactics, flexible, creative, often unpredictable. Deals once bound by rigid frameworks became fluid, evolving conversations. Efficiency dipped at first, but innovation surged in ways no algorithm had predicted. Even in military sectors, the influence crept in. Commanders studying human history found themselves unsettled by one recurring theme: humans rarely won by being the strongest. They won by refusing to think like their enemies. Adaptation, deception, resilience, traits once dismissed as primitive, suddenly appeared effective. The younger species felt it most strongly. Those who had grown under the Council's long shadow, taught to follow rather than question, found something intoxicating in human defiance. Not rebellion for its own sake, but the idea that systems could be challenged and improved. That obedience was not the same as harmony. The Council, for all its power, struggled to respond. Every action they considered risked proving humanity's point. Crack down harder, and they would validate the growing belief that control mattered more than truth. Loosen restrictions, and they would allow the very influence they feared to spread even further. Meanwhile, human transmissions evolved. They became more refined, more targeted. Stories turned into dialogues. Dialogues turned into collaborations. Humans began inviting other species to share their own perspectives, creating a decentralized exchange of ideas that no single authority could oversee. What emerged was something the galaxy had never experienced before, not an alliance, not a rebellion, but a network. A living, breathing exchange of thought that ignored borders, hierarchies, and ancient divisions. It didn't demand loyalty. It invited participation, and participation changed everything. For the first time in countless cycles, the Galactic Council was no longer the sole center of influence. It still held power, still governed vast territories, but it no longer controlled the narrative. And in a civilization built on order and predictability, losing control of the narrative was the beginning of losing everything. Humanity watched it all unfold, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, knowing resolve. They had faced suppression before, on their own world, in their own history. And every time, the result had been the same. Pressure didn't erase them. It refined them, strengthened them, forced them to become something more. The galaxy was learning that lesson now, and this time, it wasn't just humanity that would be changed by it.